morning. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill made low. This is one of my favorite images in the poetry of the Bible. Probably second to a people walking in darkness have seen a great light, which I am pleased to report my children now know is one of my favorite images. And this week, as I was explaining a little bit about Hanukkah to the kids, Rainier said, "Oh, these are people walking in darkness who have seen a great light." And I said, yes, why yes, there's so many people you will find that, that will fit in with this imagery. But this imagery today, valleys and mountains evened out and a path being made smooth, is a beautiful vision to my heart of a world where women are not sharing their stories of harassment and assault. And I think we all have causes that are important to us, that we see a vision of a world where those causes are either more loudly talked about or whether those causes have come to fruition. Right now, as a country though, we have what's called the Me Too movement, #MeToo, or pound sign, or what did my students in Rhode Island call it? The hashtag, they called it like a TikToks or something, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But this Me Too movement that has come up in the last year is a vision of women who are sharing their very vulnerable stories with our country, and our country has had to grapple with how to respond to that and what to do with that, and to decide if this is a vision that we all want to buy into, or if this is something that we think already exists and we should stop talking about it and keep moving on. But in my heart, it is one of my visions. As a woman who has my own stories, I have a vision for a world where there is a straight path for women, and that there is less fear and less shame regarding sexuality and things that have happened to us. And so in this time of Advent, in this time of joining together to listen to women, to listen to Mary when she says, I don't know how this happened, but I'll tell you what an angel told me. As we listen to Elizabeth, who says, I don't know how this happened, but here I am, and I'm going to witness to Mary. We are given this opportunity in Advent to join with these women and to join with women sitting next to us right now in a vision for what could be coming. This week in Advent is our week of peace. And I felt like so much of the words that I wanted to say resonated with every single week of Advent. Hope, peace, the joy of a coming world, the love that we bring as we hold each other tenderly. But as this week is the week for peace, I just want you to take a moment, and if Me Too is important to you, to bring that to your mind. But if there's another cause and another vision that's important to you, to just take a moment to visualize that and to feel the peace of what the world would look like when that vision is realized. Peace always feels warm in my chest. I don't know where you feel it, but I hope that you can. So the question, as I share this vision, and as many women have shared this vision in the last year, the question that I've heard over and over, online and in person from people is, but how? How do we partner to create this world? How do we help to straighten out the road and to lower the mountains and to raise the valleys? What is it that we can do? And there are many answers to that question, especially as we've all visualized perhaps different visions for the world. But I think there's two things that we can do very immediately, and they're practices, because we're humans, right? We have to practice We don't get to just say, I'm going to be good at this today, and we're suddenly good at it, even though we really wish it was that way, and sometimes we operate that way, that if I'm going to stand up here and give a homily, that I should be wonderful the first time I do it. Well, not true. It's a practice. It's a practice of public speaking. It's a practice of making our bed every morning. It's a practice of going to bed early. It's a practice of interacting with other people. And the challenging thing when we interact with other people is that our hopes and dreams and fears and conditioning have the opportunity to bump up against their hopes and dreams and fears and conditioning, sometimes in very unexpected ways, and it can make it very challenging to interact with someone else. So to kind of preface these practices, I wanted to mention that it's unpredictable. Just because you're practicing something doesn't mean it's going to go great, and sometimes that's not even your fault that it didn't go great. You might have hit on someone's last nerve without knowing it, and that wasn't on you. It just was part of them. But the other thing that I wanted to preface this with was saying that something that is becoming so important to me to remember as a parent and as a member of a community is that we are all on a journey, and no one person or one encounter can end that journey in positive ways and negative ways. No one person can completely heal trauma or pain that we have, and no one person could say the wrong thing that was so wrong that we can never recover from it. And so keeping that in mind as we interact with people and as we have this practice and these awkward moments, I think is really important to remember that no one person can affect us that way, but we also can remove some of the weight of believing that we can affect other people that way, that our actions could end a journey for them completely. So the two practices that I really wanted to talk about today are really simple, but they're so hard. Listening and being vulnerable. Listening is when someone talks about me too, and I think this is a really common response that people have, is it's very uncomfortable to hear a very vulnerable story. It's very uncomfortable to hear many vulnerable stories over and over in our national conversation, but even privately. So there's this fear of, how do I respond? Sure, I can listen, but how could I respond to someone who has shared something vulnerable with me? And there's some very easy phrases that we can use. I hear you. I'm sorry. That sounds so hard. And sometimes cuss words are pretty appropriate. But that's up to you and the person that has just shared with you. And this doesn't have to be, listening as a practice doesn't have to be just isolated to a very big, vulnerable, traumatic story. We hold each other's vulnerabilities on a daily basis. As a parent, I definitely hold them on a daily basis. And so when I talk about it being a practice, I can practice almost daily. When my 5-year-old comes to me and says, I had a really scary dream last night. We were catching dragonflies, and they turned out to be snapping dragonflies, and one snapped me on the head right here. I can hold that. I can treat that as a very vulnerable story that he just told me. I wouldn't tell you my nightmares. So why would a 5-year-old be any different? That he trusted me with his scary dream, and I can say, I hear you. That sounded like it was really scary. And in that moment, I'm practicing my responses that will serve me in all sorts of situations. So when someone shares their vulnerable story, I think a very common thing that we want to do after we give some sort of response is that then we have to figure out what to do moving forward, which is scary and intimidating. And there's kind of a couple of options, a couple extremes that we can run to. And one of them is to immediately then share our scary stories that came up. Because they shared a scary story that kind of triggered our scary stories, and all of a sudden we really need to tell our scary story. There's this concept, I can't remember if I've talked about it up here or just in adult form, but it's called dumping out and not dumping in. And it's been very helpful to me in holding people in traumatic situations and vulnerable situations, because the idea is that we have a person that has just experienced a traumatic event. We have people that are close to them and kind of a ring around them, and we have people that are maybe more peripherally affected by that event in a ring around them. So the person in the center of the ring is experiencing this and is holding this trauma. And when someone on the outside hears about that and immediately takes their trauma and puts it on that person in the center, it can make the situation a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging. And the person dumping in to the person with trauma might not feel as healed or as helped because they're trying to go to someone who's in the middle of a difficult situation. So the idea is that you would take what the trauma in the center brought up inside of you and go to someone who is on a ring next out beyond you to talk about your trauma. Because the people on the outer edges have more emotional resilience in that moment to be able to work with you then, instead of just going to that person in that moment. So maintaining the idea of dumping out and not in, there's an element of empathy where saying, I have been there and I have experienced this is very helpful. But there's also an element of, oh, that brings up this horrible thing that happened to me that leaves the person who just shared their vulnerability feeling even more isolated. Another thing that is an extreme response, sometimes when we hear a person share a traumatic event, is that we want to fix it for them and solve it and be there in every way possible. And this is born out of our incredible human need to be connected and to help each other and to engage in vulnerability. But this is where I am learning to remind myself that everyone is on a journey, and I cannot 100% solve someone else's journey. I cannot do enough loads of laundry, or bring enough meals, or provide enough childcare, or listen late at night enough times to pull them out of their pain and their hurt. I can be there as I can, but I can't be everything. I will not end the journey for them. And so finding ways to help them without completely sacrificing myself, this goes back to the idea of boundaries, is a way that I can do a service to both of us. But there's even another kind of extreme response on the other side that we have to these very vulnerable sharings, and that can be never mentioning the topic again. So much easier to just say, well, you shared that, I hope you feel better, see ya. And we could disappear from someone's life, or we could just never talk to them again about the subject that they brought up. And you want to talk about isolating someone in their pain because of our own insecurities. And this is where I think we also remember that everyone is on a journey, and I cannot wreck their journey by saying the wrong thing, by bringing up their pain at what might be a wrong moment. Because again, this is a practice. I'm practicing engaging with other human beings. And if I mess up, which I will, just tell yourself. If you're going to start this practice, just tell yourself, I'm going to mess up. It's going to happen. It's okay. You can begin again. And you have an opportunity to engage with that person in why it was the wrong time or why it was the wrong thing to say. But getting out there and continuing to create that emotional connection is so important. So I also wanted to talk about being vulnerable ourselves, because I think that as a congregation, we've talked so much about Brené Brown's work and about building community and listening to each other and holding each other's vulnerabilities. And we've talked about being vulnerable ourselves, but the opportunities to be vulnerable are, I find, much scarier than the opportunities to listen and to help someone with their own story. But I think that without practicing both of these together, we dilute the power of each of them. that we need to also practice being vulnerable ourselves and telling our own fears and our own vulnerabilities. Because the things that we try so hard to hide and the stories that we do not want to tell and that we do not want people to find out pile up. And they pile up. And they pile up. And we say, this is a thing about me that I don't want you to know. I don't want anyone to know. This is a story inside of me that I will never tell. And when we add all of those things up, we live in fear that they will pop out. Because as human beings who are on a journey of dealing with our own hurts and of dealing with our own struggles, everything inside of us longs to have someone see us and to hear our story and to tell us that they still love us. And so those stories, as much as we say, I'm never going to tell this story, I never want anyone to hear this, they try to pop out because they want to be heard and they want to be healed. And so if I am not sharing my vulnerabilities, then when I listen to other people in their vulnerabilities, I have to be a rock-hard tower that is holding my vulnerabilities back so that they don't pop out, so they don't get felt as I listen to this other person. And it means that my empathy to that other person and my kindness to that other person is limited by how much energy I'm using to hold back my own vulnerabilities. But when I take opportunities to share things that scare me, to share hard stories, to choose to share my own Me Too stories with safe people and with people that can help me find healing from the things that happen to me, I create such resiliency inside of myself that when I'm listening to someone else, instead of having to use my energy to hold back my own stories and to fight my own feelings, I can feel my own feelings, I can feel the empathy for that other person, and I can better connect with them and help them feel seen and loved and cherished in that moment. But what's also helpful in our own sharing our vulnerabilities is by hearing other people practice how they respond to us, we learn new things about how to respond to someone else. If I share something and somebody says a response that feels eminently unhelpful, I can sort of tuck that away and say, maybe I won't say that when someone confides in me. Or when someone says something incredibly helpful and loving to me, I tuck that away and say, I can use that to help someone else feel seen. This last year, as many of you are aware, and some of you might not be, Robin and I got divorced. And divorce was not something that I ever thought was going to happen to me. And it's very vulnerable to stand up here and to say that that was a thing that I tried to hold back and not be told, not say that I don't think that this marriage is going to make it. And I was terrified to tell my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. My grandfather did our wedding. And I didn't want to tell them, and I didn't know that that was going to be the hardest thing of all the things in getting divorced. And there were many. There still are many. But my grandparents having to tell them. And I finally realized that that was my biggest fear. And so I asked them if I could come over, and I went over there one afternoon, and then we small talked for a little bit, and then I said, I have to tell you, Robin and I are getting divorced. And I was so afraid of what they would say. This is my grandfather that when he saw my first tattoo, he said, oh, I thought we were smarter than that. So I was not looking forward to having this conversation. And you know what they did? As soon as I said those words, my grandmother said, oh, and my grandfather said, this must have been so hard for you. You did this all by yourself, and we didn't know. And I cried and cried. That wasn't what I was expecting to hear, but their incredible love for me in that moment and holding that very vulnerability that I was sharing, I can't tell tell you how much easier it has made the time since then to take that biggest fear that I had and to be vulnerable and to put it out there with no idea of how they would respond. Honestly, expecting a really difficult response from them, and to be met with love and for them to see what was hurting me was incredible. And that practice that they had engaged in their whole life of holding vulnerability and holding hurting people came out to help me. And that is a legacy that I will take from them on as I communicate with other people, to remember that moment and to know what it did for me. And so when we think about, this vision of a world, of whatever your world is, but for me, this Me Too movement, this opportunity for women to share, this opportunity for women to not be harassed and not to have so much that goes on that we dismiss as normal and it's just the way things are. When I think about that, and I think about how people listening and people being vulnerable and committing to practice that over and over, to hold those stories and to tell those stories, not so that if we tell enough stories, suddenly there's this preponderance of evidence that everyone will believe. I don't think that's what it's about. We share vulnerabilities so that we can forge links of community and of empathy and of kindness, so that those stories are no longer taking all of our energy to hold us back, but that those stories are out in the world to strengthen our community, to strengthen our relationships, and to bring more love and kindness and peace into the world. So as you think about whatever your topic was, whatever peace you want to bring into the world, I want to encourage you. It's a practice. You can begin again. You can share again. Your journey isn't being derailed by any one comment or any one person. But I pray that we can all find